Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Mount Angel Abbey Bach Festival. My name is Alon Goldstein, and I'm the artistic director, and it is a great privilege to welcome one of my favorite pianists, Brian Ganz. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Alon. I'm delighted to be with you.
Let's delve straight into our recital this evening, which will center around the music of Frédéric Chopin. And my first question, of course, is why Chopin? What draws you to Chopin? Why? What was it? A love at first sight?
I guess the musical version of love at first sight, love at first hearing. Whenever I speak about Chopin's profound hold over me, the first thing I think about is my love of his storytelling abilities. I love a good story. And one of the first pieces I ever fell in love with was the Ballade in G minor, his first Ballade, which I'll be playing tonight. And a Ballade is a poem that tells a story. So his four Ballades are among his greatest masterpieces and among the pieces I love the most. And they reveal his extraordinary gift for poetry. He's often called the poet of the piano, but also his extraordinary ability to tell a passionate, visceral, exciting narrative. And I find those narrative gifts even in his shorter works. And I could refer to other aspects of his great creative gifts, his beautiful gift for melody, astonishing harmonies, the great sense of mystery that I find perhaps in the Mazurkas more than anything else. But above all, it's his great gift for storytelling that has drawn me in and has never let me go.
That's great. And you mentioned the short pieces. You said even in the short pieces, and most of Chopin's works are what we call miniatures, although they're maximizing the storytelling in the miniature. But why? So why? What was it in the miniature? I mean, I guess part of it is historically, the musical scene moved from the church and the court into the salon.
Yes, yes.
Can you perhaps maybe elaborate a little bit about this phenomena of the miniature, where is not the large scale 32 Beethoven sonatas, although Chopin of course wrote some large scale works, but thrived in the short scale, in the miniatures.
Yes. Well, he had a tremendous gift for improvisation. And I suspect that in expressing so much of his musical gift through improvisation, that did not lend itself for him to large scale forms. I think he worked a great deal on his larger works, and they are masterful. I think it's a misrepresentation of him to say that he was only a miniaturist. So his ballades, the movements of his sonatas, the concerti, they are truly masterful. But you're right, he's best known for his miniatures. But the interesting thing is he didn't necessarily work any less on his miniatures. I know when he was writing a letter to a friend about his preludes that he was working on, he said he had been laboring even more on the preludes than he was on his ballade at the time, which was the second ballade. So I think for him, expressiveness was perhaps most intense when it was most compressed, and that he was able to, as a poet does, say an extraordinary amount with very few notes. And this was a gift that was very special to him, and he understood his gifts, and therefore focused, I think, most intently on creating masterpieces in the form of miniatures.
Saying so much with so few notes. I guess that's one reason he loved Mozart so much.
Yeah, very good. Mozart and Bach were his two favorite composers. I think you're absolutely right.
And speaking of inspiration, Bellini, there's something about Italian opera that was also something that drew a lot of interest in him.
That's right. He fell in love with opera at a young age. He was a frequent attendant at the opera in Warsaw, and heard, I think, Rossini and Bellini were two huge inspirations to him. And he also fell in love with a singer, Konstancja Gładkowska, who was the inspiration for the second movement of his F minor piano concerto. And so that probably also carried over into his great gift for singing through the piano.
That makes me want to bring the Chopin concerti to the festival in coming year.
Yes,
I mean,
you're here.
What music. So brings me to the third question. And one of the things that I find in Chopin's music, which is so unique and at the same time so difficult, is unbelievable balance of aristocracy and vulnerability. I mean, we all know the Polonaises, it has a great sense of dignity and pride, but I always, if only I hear that, then I feel something is missing, and that missing thing is maybe, he's longing to Poland, or maybe something, the vulnerability. I mean, it's okay. Now your turn.
I have to follow that. You said it so beautifully. I hope I have something to add, but I'll try. One of my favorite quotes, I think I've shared this with you before, from the man I consider our grand teacher. Our teacher, of course, the wonderful Jan Fleischer, and his teacher, Arthur Schnabel. And Schnabel said, the music of Mozart is a garden. Schubert is a forest. Beethoven is a mountain range. And I love that quote. And to it, I would add that Chopin's music is the human heart in all of its extraordinary emotional richness. And so often that heart is in our colloquialism in English, it's worn on the sleeve. That is, it's wide open. And that, when your heart is on your sleeve, that's a very vulnerable state. So I think you've really hit the nail on the head, and I had never even really considered that until now. See, I always learn so much. I speak now to our listeners. I always learn so much from my dear friend Alon Goldstein. So that's a beautiful pairing. I think you're absolutely right. His music requires both vulnerability and aristocracy, and the aristocracy most often in, of course, the Polonaises. But I find that pride, that dignity in all of his works to one degree or another, but certainly paired very much with vulnerability. And so I will begin meditating on that marvelous idea starting now in future performances of Chopin.
Now, over the last several years, you took a kind of an almost like an unparalleled journey to play and record every note that Chopin wrote. And I'm just curious if there were certain things that surprised you in this journey. I remember a conversation we had not long ago where you demonstrated a couple of mazurkas, and it was shocking how different. I mean, we immediately have a certain association of Chopin and the beauty of the melody and how it hurts so good.
Yes. Yeah, well said.
But it is shocking. It is dramatic. It's surprising. It's revolutionary in so many more things. And I'm just wondering, some surprises you might encounter.
Well, in the journey, and I should add that I'm only 2/3 of the way through that journey. I mean, by now I've probably played more than 2/3 of his works, but as far as the actual performance of the complete works, it's going to take 15 concerts, and I've only done 10 of those. I would say the surprise for me has been how many of the unknown works have contained so much of his exquisite voice, and these were works that I expected to be labors of love, in the not always positive sense of that phrase. That is, that they would be perhaps more labor than love. But for example, let's say the Rondo Opus 1. I mean, we never hear that in concert. The rondos are neglected works of Chopin, and there is extraordinary beauty in that piece, and I was not expecting that. That was an absolute revelation. So then when I got to the Rondo Opus 5, the a la Mazur, I was not as surprised, but still delighted to discover an extraordinary amount of beauty in that unknown piece as well. And then the fugue that absolutely nobody plays. These were pieces that when I shared them with people, they would say, "Oh my God, I think that's my new favorite work of Chopin. Why did I never hear that before?" So we comment frequently that when he reached maturity, and he reached it at a young age, he was in his late teens, and just about everything he wrote from that point on was a masterpiece. So his batting average was something like 800. If you can imagine a major leaguer batting 800. So I was expecting the early works to be, maybe batting 150 or something, but they have surprised me by the level of their beauty and their value and their substance.
That's incredible. Really.
Yeah.
And now, just as a person, something not necessarily Chopin, but so what inspires you in the teaching and performing? It can be Chopin or some other things, but can you maybe say a few things that inspire you in general in life?
Sure. Wow, that's a great question. One of my biggest inspirations is curiosity and the commitment to learn. So I grew up as the son of two wonderful English teachers, and they instilled in me a profound interest in language. So to this day, I get a daily word sent to my email inbox to learn, and I learned so much from that. And I find following up on things that I don't know to be one of the biggest inspirations for me. So curiosity in every way: science, language, history, and other forms of art. I adore poetry. I adore the visual arts. The eagerness and commitment to learn. And so it has made for me teaching an extraordinary pleasure, as well as profession, because I learn so much every time I teach. So that's one of my biggest inspirations. Poetry is another. I find often a connection between poetry and music, and there's a kind of alchemy that transforms notes into music, and I find the same alchemy in transforming words into poetry. So I try to often, my students will read a poem in their studio classes, and so poetry figures greatly in my life. Again, that probably harkens back to growing up as the son of two wonderful English teachers. And then maybe I'll refer to one more thing. Synchronicity, meaningful coincidence is one of my greatest inspirations. I love it when there are these kind of winks from the universe with a capital U, or if you're spiritually inclined, you could say from God. I find that kind of thing to be very meaningful, and so often fills me with a sense that the world is enchanted, and in its very substance is magical. And I'm constantly on the lookout for meaningful coincidence. So there you have three things that inspire me.
And my last question before we head straight to the concert is if you have anything for the audience, perhaps just to say before they listen, or I'm kind of hesitant to say to listen for, but if there's something you would like to share, one more thing before we start your recital, and we'll go straight to your incredible music making.
Thank you. I will say that I have never, although I've been to the beautiful state of Oregon, I have never played in Oregon. And I am honored, thrilled, very excited to be appearing tonight virtually in Oregon, in the beautiful state of Oregon. And I hope and pray that before long it will be safe to come in person and experience the great beauty of your state. in person and to meet some of you. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you very much enjoy tonight's concert. And before the evening is done, go out and experience the enchantment of some fireflies before you say goodnight. My best to all of you. Enjoy the concert.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And we'll see you very soon again, my dear friend.
Wonderful, my dear friend. Thank you. All the best to you. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Welcome everybody to Thursday evening of the Abbey Bach Festival at Mount Angel Abbey. I'm Abbot Jeremy, the abbot of the monastery here, and in the name of all the monks, I welcome you. This is a virtual festival. Hope some of you were with us last night. Those of you that know the Bach Festival know that we always have this lawn full of people eating dinner out here with us monks, and then retire for the concert in the concert hall behind me. We can't do that this year because of the pandemic, but we have therefore said we're going to have the Bach Festival anyway. This is the 49th year. We're going to make it to number 50. Hope to see you all here next year. But we said we're going to have the festival, and we're going to put together something that we can bring to you in your homes and remind you of what it's like to be here at the Abbey and be inviting you back next year. Tonight we have a wonderful program for you. Brian Ganz is a pianist who's going to play Chopin for you. He loves Chopin. We all do. I heard him say in an interview that when he was 12 years old, he'd heard Chopin, and it wounded him. And I identified immediately with that. I was wounded by Chopin too. I'm not a pianist, but gosh, to hear this, what he does, Brian said this in that same interview, it's so beautiful that it hurts. And he says that playing Chopin is storytelling, not with words, but with where the music goes. So that's what we have arranged for you tonight. I welcome you to this. Those of you that know the Bach Festival know that it's my custom as the abbot, introducing and welcoming you all to the festival, to start with a poem of mine that I've written and try to match it a little bit with the mood of the music. Chopin is so beautiful that it can wound you. Sometimes wounds themselves in life can be beautiful too. Not always, but often enough. There's such thing as a beautiful wound. I'm going to read you a poem called Saying Goodbye, and it's about a beautiful wound. Saying goodbye. Last night, the sky was gold at sunset where there was a crack in the clouds. And when the plane you were on roared up into the sky behind me, my whole body pulled skyward after you, but not nearly fast enough to ever catch a glimpse of you again today or to touch you from behind, barely. Instead, I was pulled earthward as well and cracked like the clouds as the great gold sun of the air came between my earthly and skyward parts and burned light forever into me. Light forever from the split of your going away. Now, here is some Chopin.
Good evening. I'm Brian Ganz, and I am delighted to be with all of you members of the listening community of the Abbey Bach Festival in the beautiful state of Oregon. Before I begin, I'd like to share a story from many years ago when I was in Paris on a dreary, rainy, cold day in late fall. I decided to visit the grave of my very favorite composer, Frédéric Chopin, in the Père Lachaise cemetery. I arrived at the cemetery far from Chopin's grave, and so I had to walk through the cemetery to get to the grave. The cemetery was utterly deserted. So I thought, wonderful, I'll have a few minutes to myself with Chopin. But when I got there, I was absolutely stunned to find an oasis of light and color and people paying homage to Chopin. There were candles and flowers. It was deeply moving to me. It was an illustration of how beloved Chopin and his music are. And it was also, for me, a beautiful metaphor of what Chopin's music can be in difficult times. An oasis of light and color and beauty. And it is my hope that this evening is such an oasis for all of you. So I begin with a Polonaise, a very beloved Polonaise. The Polonaise in A major, Opus 40, number 1. Alon and I have just spoken about how Chopin's music calls forth both vulnerability and a sense of aristocracy. The Polonaises are usually chock full of that aristocratic flavor, being the Polish dance that most often resembles a march. It often captures Chopin's deep pride and dignity in being Polish. You can almost feel the starch in the collar in the characteristic rhythm of the Polonaise. Yum, da da dum, bum, 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 dum, da da dum, bum, bum, bum.
This particular Polonaise is almost entirely devoid of that sense of vulnerability. Instead, it's all about the joy and the dignity and the pride in being Polish, with hardly a shadow across its joyous and radiant light. I hope you enjoy. Now we come to that exquisite sense of vulnerability in Chopin, with one of his most beloved etudes, Opus 10, number 3 in E major. An etude is a study which affords the performer a chance to work on some aspect of technique. In this study, Chopin teaches the pianist how to sing through the fingers, among other things. This melody struck Chopin himself as among his most beautiful. When a student played it for him, he broke down and cried, "Oh, my fatherland." He had left his homeland of Poland when he was only 20 years old, right around the time he composed this etude, and he never returned to Poland. Perhaps that coincidence of timing is what made him associate this etude with his love for his homeland. We don't know. As you listen, you might wish to think of someone or something you love and have been unable to be with in this challenging time. Or just let the music carry you wherever it will. Chopin's Etude in E major, Opus 10, number 3. Now we come to the heart of this evening's program. In many ways, it is for me the heart of Chopin's music. Chopin is often called the poet of the piano. But as I implied in my conversation with Alon, Chopin is, for me, the storyteller of the piano. In his ballades, these gifts for poetry and story come together. Because a ballade is a poem that tells a story. So this is the first of his great story poems, Ballade number 1 in G minor, opus 23. He later shared with his friend and contemporary composer, Robert Schumann, that this was his favorite, not just of his ballades, but of all of his compositions. This is the piece that wounded me when I was a boy. Because, as Alon said, it hurt so good. I hope it carries you to a place of mystery and wonder and powerful emotion. Ballade number 1 in G minor. Our next work is a Nocturne. This is Opus 32, number 2 in A-flat major. As the name implies, a Nocturne is a work that captures the spirit of night, sort of a serenade for solo piano. Chopin didn't originate this genre. The very fine Irish composer John Field did. But Chopin certainly took it to its zenith. This Nocturne is one of his lesser known. I mentioned in my talk with Alon how much I love poetry. Here's a lovely quote from a T.S. Eliot poem, one of the 4 quartets. Little Gidding. I trust that you will hear how this quote relates to the Nocturne. Here's T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. now we have some wonderful, somewhat more lighthearted dance music of Chopin. And I will let it speak for itself. 2 waltzes, 2 mazurkas. Enjoy. Our final work this evening is Chopin's second Scherzo, Opus 31 in B flat minor. A scherzo, the word itself in Italian means joke, but it's not the kind of joke you tell someone to make them laugh. It's the kind of joke you might play on someone, sort of a prank or a jest. Nevertheless, scherzi, that's the Italian form of plural of scherzo, scherzi do tend to be lighthearted and humorous affairs. So the first three of Chopin's four scherzi are conundrums to pianists and musicologists because they are very dark and dramatic and intense affairs. One of my favorite quotes about that phenomenon is from, again, Robert Schumann, friend of Chopin, great composer himself, of course, but also a very fine critic. And he wrote a review of one of the scherzi of Chopin in which he asks, how is gravity to clothe itself if levity goes about in such dark garments? So this is a question I pose to you all as you listen. What is it about this that is jest-like? What is it that's prank-like? Rather than share my own ideas, I will keep it an open question for all of you. Finally, a funny story. The piece ends with a marvelous leap outward. And it's not difficult to miss. But there's a great story about the pianist from the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, very colorful pianist named Vladimir de Pachmann, who used to make it a little harder to miss because he would tune the top octave to the same note so that he didn't have to discern which note he was playing. So I have to give that a try sometime. I'm not above that at all, but I'm not sure I trust my tuning skills. All right, here we go. Chopin B flat minor Scherzo, Opus 31. I hope so much that we have a chance to be together in person at some point. Until that time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe, stay healthy. Spend time with family and listen to lots of music. Best wishes. Hello again. I'd like to play for you a short encore, one of Chopin's shortest works, and yet one of his masterpieces. This is the Prelude in A major, opus 28, number 7. It's a piece I like to call Chopin's good night kiss. One last thing. Don't forget the fireflies.
We hope you enjoyed this evening's performance. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm Father Teresio, the co-executive director of the Abbey Bach Festival, and we'd hope that you would consider giving us a donation, and you can find that link on our Abbey website if you go to the Abbey Bach Festival. And we hope you will join us tomorrow evening for some guitar music by Gigi. Have a good night and God bless.